Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Joseph Kishore, the National Secretary of the Socialist Equality Party in the United States. On behalf of the World Socialist Web Site and the International Committee of the Fourth International, I would like to welcome all of you to this emergency global webinar to discuss the US-Israeli war against Iran and what must be done to stop it. In just over a week, we have witnessed a rapid escalation of imperialist violence that threatens to set the entire Middle East, and indeed the world, on fire. This war began with political assassination and has proceeded through a widening campaign of mass bombardment, hitting hospitals and civilian infrastructure, killing children, and expanding beyond Iran's borders. The strike on a girls' school in Manab that killed 150 children, the bombing of cities, and the torpedoing of an unarmed Iranian vessel in international waters point to what this war actually is, a war of extermination. Even as we are meeting, the US and Israel are fulfilling Trump's pledge on Friday to attack Iran very hard, intensifying the bombardment of major population centers and vital infrastructure. Thick, choking black smoke is hanging over Tehran right now after strikes on oil storage facilities, releasing hazardous and toxic substances into the air and endangering civilians on a massive scale. The Trump administration declares that it is not beholden to international law or indeed any constraints on the actions of American imperialism. It is demanding unconditional surrender and pledging complete destruction and certain death to a country of over 90 million people. Over the weekend, the administration again stated that it was actively planning the deployment of US ground troops. We have called this meeting to cut through the propaganda, to explain the origins of this war, the social forces driving it, and the strategy required to stop it. Before we begin, let me introduce our panelists. David North is the chairman of the International Editorial Board of the World Socialist Web Site, the national chairman of the Socialist Equality Party in the United States, and author of numerous books, including A Quarter Century of War, The US Drive for Global Hegemony, 1990 to 2016, The Russian Revolution and the Unfinished 20th Century, and In Defense of Leon Trotsky. Christoph Andreyer is chairman of the Sozialistische Gleichheitspartei, the Socialist Equality Party in Germany, and author of Why Are They Back? Historical Falsification, Political Conspiracy, and the Return of Fascism in Germany. Keith Jones is National Secretary of the Socialist Equality Party in Canada, and author of The Struggle Against Imperialism and for Workers' Power in Iran. Ulaş Sevenci is chairman of the Socialist Equality Party in Turkey. Tom Scripps, Assistant National Secretary of the Socialist Equality Party in the UK. And finally, Will Lehman, an auto worker at Mack Trucks in Macungie, Pennsylvania, and a candidate for president of the United Auto Workers. This webinar is also a discussion. We urge everyone listening to submit questions throughout the meeting. You can do so in the form on the webpage that you're watching, or if you're watching on social media, you can leave a comment. Now I'm going to bring in my co-moderator, Tom Peters, a leading member of the Socialist Equality Group in New Zealand, who is joining us from Wellington.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to everyone joining us today from around the world. As you said, Joe, this war is already expanding across the whole Middle East. The Israeli government is now bombing the south of Beirut, an area with about 500,000 people, demanding that it be evacuated. And members of the government in Tel Aviv are saying they'll turn it into a new Gaza. Lebanon has reported nearly 400 people dead, including 83 children over the past few days in the Israeli bombardment. And this war, as you said, is inflaming global tensions. It's sharpening the danger of a direct confrontation between nuclear-armed powers, and it's accelerating the drive towards authoritarianism and repression in the United States, across Europe, and throughout the world. And I mean, the same governments which are claiming to defend democracy in this war are lining up behind state murder abroad and the suppression of the working class opposition at home. Over the past 3.5 decades, the Middle East has been subjected to an almost continuous succession of US-led wars, from the 1991 Gulf War through to the ongoing genocide in Gaza. The assault on Iran represents a major further escalation. It is an attempt to impose imperialist domination through the total destruction of a whole people, a society, and a culture in a region that the imperialist powers view as a strategic prize in a widening global conflict. As Joe explained, the purpose of today's webinar is to provide clarity about what are the aims of this war, what is its historical background, and why is there no genuine opposition within the political establishment, really in any country? Why are the corporate media functioning as propagandists? And above all, what is the role of the working class, the only social force capable of stopping this descent into barbarism? What political perspective must be adopted, and what action must workers take? We want to encourage everyone watching to treat this meeting as the beginning of a discussion and organization. We want you to share the link to this live stream and bring your co-workers and friends into the conversation. And again, please send in your questions as we proceed with the discussion. You can ask about anything, events on the ground, the historical context, the role of governments internationally, and what is required to build a movement against this war. I'd like to begin the discussion with a question for David North. David, in your article published on the World Socialist Site last week, titled "Mass Murder in the Indian Ocean, the Torpedoing of the IRIS Denner," you wrote that the Trump administration, quote, "has not offered a single word of justification for this attack on an unarmed naval vessel of the Iranian Navy." You say it has offered nothing because it does not believe that anything is required, and that what has replaced the rules-based order is, quote, "the naked assertion that the United States may kill whomever it wishes, wherever it wishes, whenever it wishes." So my question to you is, how should we understand what this means historically and politically? I mean, are we witnessing the open abandonment of any and all legal restraints as a principle of state policy by the Trump administration?
Well, the direct answer to that is yes, of course. It's important, though, to make the point that this did not by any means begin with Trump. In recent weeks and many recent days, and many of the commentaries which can be followed on the internet, various webinars which have been held, there has been frequent reference made to the Nuremberg trials of 1945-46. Well, back in 2004, when I was invited to participate in a debate in the immediate aftermath of the war of 2003, I reviewed the issues which were raised in Nuremberg and the speech of Robert Jackson, and stressed that the principal charge brought against the defendants in Nuremberg, Goering, Keitel, Jodl, and various other ringleaders of the Nazi regime, both in the military and their civilian leadership, the principal charge brought against them was crimes against peace. That was the launching of a war without any legal justification. There was no imminent threat to the United States. Every claim, including the absurd claim that Iran was about to launch a nuclear strike on the United States, no one believes it. Everyone knows it's a lie. So the leadership of the United States is absolutely implicated in crimes which were identified and which formed the basis of the prosecution and ultimately the execution of the leaders of the Nazi regime. I just want to stress as we begin the discussion, and I'm sure this will be very wide-ranging, that every discussion of this war must begin with this. It's frankly disgusting to hear commentators on American television. I'm sure the same is true for what those of you who are in Europe or in Asia, Latin America, even in New Zealand are hearing. There's all sorts of discussions as to the strategy of the war and so on. Everything must begin with the fact this is an illegal war. Those who are launching it are political criminals, and their actions have to be viewed in those terms. There's one other point I'd like to also emphasize as we begin this discussion. There's a lot being said about the Trump administration having no strategy. Well, they don't have what appears to be a rational strategy, but the irrationality is built into what in fact is a very real strategy, and one which didn't begin with Trump. As Tom, you've just noted, it's now some 35 years since the first Gulf War. And that was a war which marked the beginning of the attempt by the United States to assert in the immediate aftermath of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, that is the shutting down of the USSR by the Stalinist bureaucracy, the attempt by the United States to assert unchallenged global hegemony. That's what the strategy of all the wars have been. It was very clearly outlined in numerous policy statements, and the methods being used become increasingly violent and uncontrolled because the entire project is not realizable except through basically the policy of global mass murder. And what is taking place in Tehran, the pictures you've just shown, it's a continuation of what we saw during the past 2 years in Gaza. And what we will see, if this is not stopped by the working class, in future wars, it will be pictures not of Tehran, it will be pictures of Moscow, it will be pictures of Beijing. This is a ruling class which is completely out of control. And they've embarked upon a war whose consequences will be catastrophic if they believe and are living under the illusion or delusion that they are going to achieve some sort of military victory. They are truly out of their mind. This is not a war which is simply going to dissolve. It's part of an expanding global conflict. The United States, as well as its European allies, even after they've been kicked in the face by Trump, they all believe that they're going to somehow restore their old colonial status. If I could just sum up these remarks, what's the strategy of this war? It's basically to abolish the 20th century. That is to wipe out all the consequences of the national democratic and socialist struggles of the 20th century, to act as if it was all somehow a big mistake, that colonial domination can be restored, imperialism can rule. And for the working class in the advanced countries, it means that all the rights and gains which they won through decades of struggle with the countless martyrs of the struggle against ruthless corporations in the United States, against the attempt to implement fascism in Europe, all of those gains, whatever remains of them, are to be wiped out. The old declaration of the ruling elites, slaves you were and slaves you will be. That's the strategy of this war.
Thank you, Dave. Well, I think that's, you've painted a very stark picture of the strategy of the Trump administration and of all of the imperialist powers, really, which are rallying to support these atrocities. I mean, I note, for instance, that in the sinking of the IRIS Dena, there were Australian military personnel on board this American submarine. So, you know, from the outset, that country and its government, led by the Labour Party, is utterly complicit in this war crime, which we've compared to the crimes of the Nazis. And the same can be said of all of the European powers, really, which have expressed their support for this criminal bombing of Iran. I'd like now to bring into the discussion perhaps Keith Jones, who has written extensively on the history of Iran and also on the recent developments in the lead up to this imperialist attack in Iran, the protests against the regime. But I think, Keith, perhaps you could just begin by, I mean, Comrade Dave has just discussed the criminal aims of this war, and I think it would be important for our viewers to have an idea of what exactly this means for Iranian society itself. I mean, this is not just, as we've said on the World Socialist website, this is not just an abstraction on a map sitting in the Pentagon, a bunch of coordinates and military targets. It's a country of more than 90 million people with, you know, a diverse range of different peoples and cultures, and you know, one of the great centers of world civilization, in fact. So I wonder if you could speak in general terms about the impact that this war will have on Iranian society and culture.
Well, first of all, I mean, there is no question that, as Comrade North underlined, war is a criminal war, a war that is being waged by criminal governments, above all the Trump administration and its junior partner and attack dog in Israel. And it is already having a catastrophic impact on the people of Iran, and indeed on the entire region. I mean, they are seeking to eradicate the Iranian state. The war began, of course, with decapitation strikes that have been universally celebrated by the Western media. It has seen a massive attack on cities across Iran and on infrastructure. I mean, in carrying out this criminal war, they are attacking, as you yourself, Tom, have just referenced, a country and a culture that has a thousands-long-year history, that has made a significant contribution to the world, and which has, of course, had a huge impact, not just on the Middle East, but certainly on the Indian subcontinent, Europe, and you know, the Trump administration, in pursuit of its predatory aims, is, you know, I mean, we see every day Trump, Hegseth, reveling in the destruction that they are raining on the Iranian people, and boasting of their capacity to continue this for weeks to come. We've already spoken about the sinking of the IRNS Dina, something that took place thousands of miles away from Iran, attacking an essentially defenseless ship. And of course, I mean, that speaks to the character of the way in which this war is being waged. The methods, and one shrinks at using this word, but the methods that were perfected in carrying out the genocide, the ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza, are now being unleashed against the people of Iran. I mean, figures, of course, the death toll is continuing to rise. But yesterday, Hossein Kolivan, the president of the Iranian Red Crescent, reported that in addition to the more than 1,300 deaths that have in Iran and thousands of casualties, more than 6,000 civilian structures have sustained damage. This includes 5,535 residential units, 1,041 commercial buildings, 64 schools, 14 medical centers, including hospitals in Tehran, 13 Red Crescent facilities. Yesterday, a desalination plant on Keshum Island was attacked. That is a plant that transforms salt water into drinkable water. This, of course, in a country which has suffered and is suffering an historic drought. And a country, it needs also to be stated, that has suffered decades of sanctions that have had that have been effectively aimed at strangling Iran's economic development and imposing the most punishing conditions on its people. Of course, this war is one of the justifications that is being touted for this war, is to prevent Iran from continuing its nuclear program. Of course, it was none other than Trump who in 2018 pulled the United States out of the UN-backed Iran nuclear accord, imposed massive sanctions with the express aim of crashing Iran's economy and bringing about regime change. And then you have also referenced, and of course, those sanctions were continued seamlessly under the Democratic administration of Joe Biden. Now, there are no precise studies, but it is estimated that tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Iranians have died over the past 2 decades just as a result of the sanctions and the denial of Iran of access to modern, the most advanced medical equipment and pharmaceuticals. So just finally, you raised the question of this being a complex, multi-ethnic society. We have seen in recent days the Trump administration, the Israelis, talking about arming the Kurds, talking about exploiting the ethnic divisions. We are not supporters of the Islamic Republic. There is no question that there are the democratic rights of the Kurdish people, and to say nothing of the entire population, that the working class have been suppressed under this regime. But that does not in any way what they are attempting to do, or at least at this point discussing, is essentially seeking to precipitate a Syria-style civil war writ large, to destroy the Iranian society and its people, seeking to whip up and fan whatever ethnic, religious fissures that there are within that society. The Iranian regime is...
Sorry, if I could interject here, Keith, because you're raising the issue of the stoking of a civil war and the question of the alliance of the Kurds, which we should come back to, and I would ask Ulash to speak on that. But before we do, if I could ask Christoph and Tom Scripps to speak on we were talking about a now developing global conflict, the involvement of all the imperialist powers. If I could actually just play, do we have the clip from, and I think this relates both also the points that David was making at the beginning. Do we have the clip of Hegseth speaking?
America, regardless of what so-called international institutions say, is unleashing the most lethal and precise air power campaign in history. B-2s, fighters, drones, missiles, and of course, classified effects. All on our terms, with maximum authorities. No stupid rules of engagement, no nation-building quagmire, no democracy-building exercise, no politically correct wars. We fight to win, and we don't waste time or lives. As the
This is a statement from the so-called Secretary of War, essentially saying that the United States is going to carry out war without any restraints, without any regard to international law. And I think what, Keith, you're describing is happening in Iran is, of course, the product of that. And just to introduce the point, perhaps, Christoph, you could speak to this. Just one other clip with Merz speaking with Trump.
We are on the same page in terms of getting this terrible regime in Tehran away. And
a brief clip, of course, from a longer meeting. But Christoph, perhaps first, and then also Tom, you could speak in a statement, Christoph, that you posted this past week, which was very widely shared on social media. You warned that Merz is offering bases, aircraft, and political cover, and described this as complicity in a crime against peace for which the Nazis were convicted at Nuremberg. Can you speak to how this is seen in Germany and the historical issues involved in the alignment of Merz and the German ruling class with this war?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the scenes you just have seen have a great impact on workers around the world and definitely in Europe. I mean, you have on the one hand really Hegseth, also Trump and Vance, really speaking a fascistic language in justifying this war. And then you have the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz basically traveling to Washington to kiss the ring of Trump, to kiss Trump's ring, and to support fully this war. This has a great impact. I mean, this language you just saw, what Hegseth said, this language is known to workers in Germany and throughout Europe. That's the language of the Nazis. I mean, when he says that there are no rules, but we are fighting to win, that's pretty much what Hitler said. For example, in his speech to the generals or to the officers of his army shortly before he started the attack on Poland, when he said the victor will not be asked later whether he told the truth or not. When starting and waging a war, it is not justice that matters, but victory. And later in the war against the Soviet Union, he of course openly declared that the rules of warfare should not apply to this war. And it was planned from the beginning as a war of annihilation. And I mean, we in our book, Why Are They Back? We showed how the German ruling class is rehabilitating Hitler in order to wage new wars, to commit new crimes. And now you have a situation where the government of the United States is waging a war of extermination with absolute brutal methods. And you have the German Chancellor applauding to him. And all that is justified by fascistic ideology. And then Merz says, yeah, as you quoted, we are on the same page in this war and is supporting this war completely. And interestingly enough, this policy is not just pursued by the government, it is supported by all the parties in the German parliament. Especially the left party celebrated the killings of Khamenei and of other leading figures of the Iranian regime. The chairperson of the left party, Jan van Aken, said, "It's good that they are gone and may they rot in hell." I mean, he says that this is a criminal and an illegal war. It's against international law. But at the same time, he's legitimizing its outcome and is supporting its aims. He also supports the pretext of preventing a nuclear bomb that Iran is developing a nuclear bomb. And he also supported the aim of regime change. He just says, well, maybe we can do it more effective without such a military strike. That is the role of the left party in the German parliament. No, I think really this common war front in the German political establishment has really huge consequences for the consciousness of the working class. I mean, for 4 years now, the German government and all the parties justified the escalation of the war against Ukraine and the billions in weapons deliveries, time and again by citing Russia's violation of international law. And now they are openly supporting this through and through criminal war. This has huge consequences. And well, at the same time, after a week of the war, there are some critical voices in the German government, but they are not concerned with the brutal methods of this war, and they are not concerned with the imperialist character of this war, but they are concerned about its economic impact on Germany, because the German industry is already in a deep crisis due to the high energy prices and the growing trade war with the United States. And a further hike in the energy prices will have catastrophic consequences for the German and the whole European economy. And so you can say in this regard, these comments also reflect the growing conflicts between the US and Europe, also on this war. So, but I think you definitely can say the ruling class in Germany is supporting this war, first of all, because they want to secure its share of the imperialist spoils, and they can't oppose the US militarily at the moment, so they're joining it. Second, because they know that the realization of their own great power ambitions requires the same methods as Trump is currently implementing in this war. And that is why the main conclusion of the ruling class in Germany and throughout Europe is to build the most powerful military force themselves. Germany announced to build the most powerful military force on the continent and to rearm on a scale not seen since Hitler, in order to be able to assert their own imperialist interests militarily, especially, of course, against Russia. But I think really the deepening of the economic crisis through this war and the massive rearmament will lead to even greater opposition in the working class. The decisive question is really the question of leadership, and we really have to put we have to oppose imperialism with the international unity of the working class in Europe, in the Middle East, and throughout the world.
Thank you, Christoph. We'll come back as well also to the what you referred to, the economic impact, of course, in Europe and throughout the world. I did want to bring Tom into this as well. If you could speak on the response in the UK. Trump just tweeted this weekend that Starmer has agreed or is considering the sending of aircraft carriers to the Middle East. What has been the response in the UK? I just also wanted to read if any of our panelists want to speak. There's a number of questions coming in. Questions along the following lines. Mimi asks, both countries are mobilizing troops to send into Iran. How can this be stopped? I think referencing the United States, and we can perhaps return to that issue as well in terms of the impact in the United States of ground troops, which they're discussing. What will happen if America loses this war? Can someone speak candidly about the true scope of the war so far? In terms of I think Keith has addressed that. These are questions which our panelists may want to answer in the course of the further discussion. But Tom, could you first speak about, I would just also add, by the way, France and Macron's statements about expanding nuclear weapons capacity. But could you speak about the response in the UK and the Starmer government?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing to say is that once again, a Labour government is involving the UK in a criminal war in the Middle East against the overwhelming opposition of the population. And if the methods of the war itself are those of brutality and extermination, then the methods of its preparation are, as ever, duplicity and deception. We know from leaked reports from Britain's National Security Council that the government was told well in advance of the initial strikes, over 2 weeks. And so it was complicit in the whole criminal fraud of the negotiations that was designed, as we know, to leave or to try to achieve the result that the Iranian regime was unprepared and caught by surprise, by a surprise attack. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, and Defence Secretary John Healey were all for full involvement from the off in this criminal operation. This was held up for a time by a degree of nervousness on the part of some members of the cabinet over not so much its blatant criminality, but the fact that they hadn't quite got their ducks in a line over sort of pasting a legal fig leaf over this. There was an effort then, all of this entirely behind the scenes, unbeknownst to the British population, the working class, an effort to create some sort of pretext. And that involved senior British Army officials speaking with their American counterparts about how to craft a request that would allow the UK government to claim some sort of justification for its involvement in all of this. In the end, they settled on using retaliatory Iranian strikes across the Gulf, and also an extremely murky, to say the least, claimed drone strike on a UK base in Cyprus as a pretext. And since then, these have been used to justify the deployment of extensive British forces, both fighter jets and now increasingly naval assets. A destroyer is on its way. France, Italy have also made use of the supposed Iranian drone attack on the Cyprus base as a pretext to send their own naval assets to the region. And as you pointed to, most recently, Britain is talking about sending one, if not two, aircraft carriers to the region. All of this is spoken of by government ministers, unchallenged really in the press, as, well, laughably and cynically, a defensive action. Of course, in reality, it is an extensive support network for what Keith has described and what Dave has described a war of annihilation and extermination and dismemberment of Iranian society. I do want to speak briefly on, I think the tension there was initially in the cabinet is significant because it points to a key dynamic in British politics at the moment, a working class majority deeply, fiercely opposed to Starmer's right-wing, unprecedentedly right-wing reactionary Labour government, really on every front, economically, in terms of its attack on democratic rights, its militarism. And as I say, that opposition extends to this war, this specific war. And on the other hand, a ruling class, which is so ferocious in pursuit of its predatory interests, that it is increasingly frustrated with the Starmer government, as reactionary and right-wing as it is, for not going fast enough. And that reached a high point or a low point with this morning's papers, broadcasting the opinions, which were very deliberately leaked from a private lunch event, of the globally notorious criminal Tony Blair, saying that he was very critical of the British government to this point for not having involved itself wholeheartedly with this latest criminal offensive in the Middle East. Now, of course, the source of any nervousness there is in the cabinet is that they remember well what Iraq did for Blair, for the Labour Party, and for British politics as a whole. It had a devastating impact on the whole legitimacy of bourgeois politics. It shattered it. I mean, my political development was I grew up in the aftermath of that, of these crimes, with the lie and its terrible consequences of weapons of mass destruction. You know, that was really ringing in the ears of my generation. They have a fear of that. Of course, it generated enormous popular opposition, and I think we can come on to, because it's so fundamental to political orientation in this moment, what happened, what was done to that political mass opposition by its leadership. For the moment, let's stress that they're proceeding, the Labour government's proceeding in spite of these concerns, which are real, and under conditions, it should be said, of much, much greater social tension, much more developed social opposition and hostility. They're proceeding in spite of this underscores the really historic crisis in which the European powers find themselves. They are being heavily outcompeted economically by the United States. China is gaining ground. The increasingly hostile turn of the United States over Trump towards the Europeans has left them far behind where they need to be to project their interests on a global scale in terms of the developments of their militaries, in order to get where they need to be to build up that competitiveness, to begin to start exerting themselves in the way that they want to, which was set out by Marco Rubio. There's nothing that distinguishes Rubio's comments to the Munich Security Conference from the politics of the Europeans, other than the openness with which they were declared at this point. To get there for the Europeans means the obliteration of the democratic conquest of the working class, of the social gains and conquests of the working class, as far as they still remain. And it also means a drive driven by the desperate position, but no less dangerous for that, in fact, in many ways more so, towards plunder and the conquest of geostrategic position abroad. That includes in the Middle East, but it also includes, as we've seen play out over the last few years, the war against Russia, in which they are increasingly taking a leading role. So much of what just the first few days of the Iran war has underscored is the fragility of European capitalism vis-a-vis the availability of energy. And Russia is, of course, energy, minerals, all sorts of critical resources necessary for a modern economy. And of course, Russia is a major source of all of those. It is these predatory interests which ultimately underscore, or underpin rather, the European complicity in the crimes that we're seeing play out today, and which were prepared, as Christoph and Comrades very rightly said, by the complicity in the crime of our time to this point, the Gaza genocide.
Thank you for that, Tom. I think we can return to some of these issues, including the connection that both speakers have outlined between the ongoing war in Ukraine, the US-NATO war against Russia, and the Gaza genocide, and now the war against Iran. But I'd like now just to mention to our viewers some important publications, or a couple of important publications by our panelists. If we can bring up that slide from Mering Books on the screen. The one with the pamphlet by Keith Jones, The Struggle Against Imperialism and for Workers' Power in Iran. Do we have that one? Well, I can. I mean, the ones you see on screen today, I would encourage all of our viewers to go to mering.com and look through the publications we have on offer there. In particular, I want to highlight The Logic of Zionism, From Nationalist Myth to the Gaza Genocide, by David North, and which is an analysis delivered in the form of a series of lectures examining the roots of this historic crime in the nationalist ideology of Zionism, as well as the socialist struggle against Zionism and against the creation of the State of Israel, especially by the Trotskyist movement. I'll return to some of those publications later, including Socialism Against War, the May Day speeches delivered by David North from 2014 to 2024, which are an extraordinarily prescient analysis, really, of the build-up to the current global conflict that is erupting internationally. And if okay, all right, I'd like to proceed now to a question that we've received from the audience, and I'd like to ask this to Ulaş Sevinci from Turkey. This is a question about the important recent wildcat strike and occupation at the Polyak Enyes mine, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Izmir. Could you speak about the importance of this occupation by, I believe, more than 1,200 workers for the Turkish working class? What does it reveal about class relations within Turkey, the level of militancy, which has major economic and political implications for the Middle East? What opportunities does it present for building sections of the Socialist Equality Party across the Middle East? And how important is that aim for creating a socialist federation of the Middle East? So if you could maybe speak a bit about this occupation for our listeners, and in the context of this war that has now erupted, where do we see, how does the Socialist Equality Party see the significance of this militant action by a very important section of the working class in Turkey?
Yes, thank you, Tom. It's a very significant question that raises many issues. First of all, this wildcat strike erupted before the US-Israeli war on Iran and continued during the first days. And it was a rank and file rebellion against the pro-corporate union apparatus, but also workers have confronted with state apparatus, the Erdogan government's police and gendarme forces, and a grassroots organization played a significant role in this. And during this wildcat strike and occupation, Comrade Will Lehman issued a very strong statement of solidarity with them, emphasizing the necessity to advance, to build an international strategy and organization. I believe he can speak on it more. But I think one of the most important aspects of this fight was one of the issues was raised during it, which is during this White Case strike, it was openly discussed among workers that that if workers seize the control of the mine now, they could seize control of the country, and this I think is a very sharp explanation of the the major concern of the ruling class, not only in Turkey but internationally. They basically objectively demonstrated that there is the social force, the social power that must be mobilized against the imperialist war and its collaborators in Turkey and internationally. So on this basis, I think this strike during the war should be seen a very significant example of the power and role of the working class. As we are explaining that this imperialist war on Iran is stemming from the very major internal contradictions of the capitalist system. Imperialism itself is a product of it, and there is no way out except a socialist revolution in the imperialist centers and globally. And we are raising a very powerful international strategy to on the basis of the unification of workers in Iran, across the Middle East, in the United States, and globally. I mean, without fighting for such a perspective, addressing and also addressing to American workers, European workers, and also Middle Eastern workers on the basis of their common class interests, on the basis of an international socialist program and strategy. It is not possible to defeat imperialism or not possible to reach a peaceful world. So I think the most significant lesson of this strike is this. And on this basis, we are defending and, defending such White Case strike initiatives, but also we are explaining that these spontaneous initiatives in Turkey and internationally must be armed with a political strategy. So the IC's and its sections' role is to provide this political perspective and organization internationally.
Thank you, Ulash. I'd like to bring in Comrade Will Lehman, who is joining us from the United States. And as we mentioned in the introduction, Will is standing as a socialist candidate for president of the United Auto Workers Union, with the support of the Socialist Equality Party in the United States. And as Ulash mentioned, Will, you delivered a powerful statement in support of the workers' occupation of the mine in Polyak in Turkey. And I wonder if you could speak about that and about the the need for international unity of the working class against this war, and perhaps also what you have been hearing from workers in the auto industry or elsewhere about their feelings on this bombing of Iran, on the genocide in Gaza, and how to stop it. If you could address those issues, please.
Yes, I'd like to start with, in the US, the trade unions generally promote the most filthy nationalism possible, and in doing so, try to undermine the collective strength of workers internationally. Part of what reps find hostile to in what I say is the idea that workers in other countries will collaborate with workers in the US. And I think that, in doing that, they're also mentioning that workers in other countries are willing to take less, and they're willing to undermine workers in the US, and that they're not willing to fight for more. And I think that the Turkish miners are showing basically the most powerful example of a workers' fight in recent memory. I mean, I know that it comes on the heels of the Migros workers in Turkey as well, the warehouse workers that secured a number of gains, striking across 14 sites. So workers in Turkey are essentially leading the way, and that they're already contemplating things like how they can run the mines in their interest and how they can run the countries in their interest. I think that explodes the myth, the nationalist myths that are promoted by union bureaucrats in the US, that workers don't want to fight elsewhere. And I think one of the other things to note about that too is, if they do establish a workers' government, the lessons of history that need to be applied and, considered by workers in other countries about the idea of essentially socialism in one country, and how we can understand historically why workers in other countries would need to come to their aid and establish workers' governments as well. And again, just to applaud the Turkish workers that they're so far ahead of where other workers are in terms of action. And I think that they serve as a lesson to workers internationally. As far as the war in Iran, it's massively unpopular among the workers I talk to. There's a number of workers at my plant that have served in the military and have served deployments in the Middle East. Naturally, even in my generation, there's been over a dozen, relatively certain over a dozen military interventions by the US military in the Middle East. That's a very sensitive subject. And for workers that were already looking for an alternative to the Biden-Harris administration with their war in Ukraine and the genocide in Gaza in Trump. And again, a tweet making its round now from 2019 is of Trump talking about he doesn't want to be in the Middle East forever. And workers thought that maybe there could be some kind of reform with Trump in getting out of the Middle East, which is wildly unpopular. And it's reflected in the percentage of approval in different polls. And I know the website has noted it, but only 20% approval among US citizens for the war in Iran. That's seems actually kind of high to me from, talking to workers. It seems like that might be inflated somehow, but because there's massively not a base of support among at least the working class for the war in Iran. And again, it's workers that have been through these conflicts in the Middle East that have seen that they're not being used as nothing but pawns in the greater, it's not always connected immediately as such, but the greater imperialist aims of the United States. So, I mean, just to wrap it up, I think that workers need to follow the examples of the Turkish mine workers, and also too, Ulash is writing on the World Socialist Web Site, and if anyone wants to read the statement I put out, it's available on my website, willforuawpresident.com.
Thank you, Will. And I think these are critical issues, which again we'll also return to in terms of how the opposition has to be developed in the working class, and the response and the opposition that exists in the working class to this war from the very beginning. And there's been a long experience now as well. I did want to bring in some of, or to turn to, or perhaps bring into this discussion some of the broader historical issues. One of our readers asks the following question, and this question I'll be addressing to David. The reader asks, what are the specific conditions the previous wars in the Middle East have had with the war in Iran, besides the broader motivation of the US and Europe trying to return to being colonial powers, which raises the sort of broader history of war in the Middle East. But I wanted to address this question in relationship to what is, I think, now developing. You see it often on social media from various commentators, including the far right, which are presenting this as Israel's war. If I could just cite this is from Jacobin Magazine, which is affiliated with the Democratic Socialists of America in the United States, which published an article on March 4th under the headline, "The US is fighting Israel's war in Iran." The article states that it is an inescapable conclusion that America is fighting this dreadful and rapidly escalating war, not with Israel, but on its behalf. Can you speak to the actual motivations and background and driving forces of this war, but specifically in relationship to, because it's not, I mean, this is something one sees now often, or in many different sources, this position.
Well, there's no question that Israel wants this war. And the role that it's playing and has been playing is absolutely criminal. There's no question about that. But I think the narrative which is developing, that this is simply Israel's war and that the United States has been dragged into it by Israel, is fundamentally false. I mean, let's keep the relationships correct. I mean, the tail may wag very, very vigorously but it's the dog that's running the show. Israel does not drive American policy. Now, I don't want to suggest that there isn't a powerful Zionist lobby. Of course there is. And that Netanyahu has wanted this war. Of course he does. But if it were not for the fact that Israel, in the final analysis, is functioning as an instrument of American imperialism, if Israel's policies were not in alignment with the goals of the United States, one can be sure that an American administration would deal with the Zionist lobby the way the Roosevelt administration dealt when World War II began with the German-American Bund, which at one time was also very powerful in the United States. I mean, the admirers of Adolf Hitler, there was a substantial number of them, and they even had the support of Lindbergh, the famous aviator. But at the point in which those efforts conflicted with basic American policy, they were shut down. And I think that is extremely important when one discusses the issue of Israel, because it leads to certainly very false conclusions. The idea that if it were not for Israel, America would be the best friend of Iran. The fact of the matter is that one of the reasons for the enormous growth in the influence of Israel and Zionism, with a very close interaction of American and Israeli policy, is the Iranian Revolution. Until 1978, Iran, and I'm sure Keith would back me up on this one, the Iranian regime, the Shah, functioned as the gendarme of the Middle East, the gendarme of the Persian Gulf. One of the reasons for America's enormous anger over the Iranian Revolution was that it had so much military equipment, the most advanced jets, artillery. I mean, they had loaded the Shah up with virtually everything. And he was seen, and the Iranian regime was seen as a much more powerful factor in Middle Eastern politics and in the crucial area of the Persian Gulf than Israel. And also let us keep in mind that the 1953 coup, which was organized by the United States, I mean, Israel played I don't think it played any role in that. So to sort of present this as simply an Israeli war is to provide an alibi for American imperialism and to extract this war from the entire global strategy of the United States. The United States created Israel in 1948, the first country to recognize the Israeli state's declaration of sovereignty in May 1948 was the United States. And that has defined the relationship. I'll give another example. There was an American by the name of Jonathan Pollard who worked in the intelligence agencies, and he was found, I think in the early 2000s or late 1990s, to have spied, I think in the early 1990s, he was found to have spied for Israel. I mean, he was thrown into prison for 30 years, and all the efforts of Israeli and Zionist lobbyists to get him out failed because, as far as the ruling elites and those who run the American state were concerned, Israel had crossed the line. And so he remained in prison for 30 years. Now, nothing I'm saying is intended in any way to diminish the incredibly reactionary role played by Israel or the fact that, of course, it does exercise influence, it does buy congressmen, it does all of that. Its lobbying efforts are extraordinary, but it is not pushing against the wind. Its power is bound up with the fact that its interests are aligned with those of American imperialism. And I think that's extremely important to understand, because in the end, if one takes the view that this is simply Israel's war, then one provides an alibi for U.S. imperialism, and one leaves oneself unprepared for the subsequent evolution and the further global operations which will be carried out. I don't think Israel played a major role in the attack on Venezuela, or for that matter, the encirclement of Cuba. I'm sure Netanyahu supports it, but he's not the driving force. American imperialism is the basic counter-revolutionary force in the world. And that's true not only in terms of understanding the dynamics of world imperialism, but also the dynamics of revolution. Because I think there is a question as to what are the consequences of an American defeat. I think one must keep in mind, and one places this war in its broader framework, the very contradictions that drive the United States to war, that is a desperate attempt to solve the fundamental problems of American imperialism, the long-term decline in its economic dominance, its efforts to establish control over vital raw materials, the underlying conflict between the global aspirations of American imperialism and the nation-state system, the conflict between private ownership of the means of production and social production, transnational production. In other words, all the contradictions which drive the United States toward war, well, these are the same contradictions which are giving rise to an enormous explosive development of the international class struggle. When I say, and I'll make this prediction, that the United States will lose this war, it will lose this war not simply because or only because of the resistance of the Iranian masses, which will be considerable, but more fundamentally, the very character of the war and the very contradictions that gave rise to the war are also intensifying social contradictions in every capitalist country, and of course in the major imperialist centers. Before this war began, the United States was experiencing a a massive growth of social conflict and opposition to the immigration policies. There were mass demonstrations taking place in the United States. We have seen a steady escalation of industrial struggle by the working class. And that phenomenon is not unrelated to the war which is now breaking out. It is well known that a factor in the outbreak of war in 1914 was the sense among the major imperialist powers that it was a way of counteracting the growing militancy within the working class. And initially, it seemed to have suppressed class struggle. But inevitably, when that struggle erupted, first and foremost within Russia in 1917, it had an explosive force which passed far beyond the borders of Russia itself. And I think this is critical. And those of you who are listening, because you should be listening from the standpoint not only of moral outrage, which you certainly should feel, but you should be concerned with, well, what are the strategical implications of this war? This war is going to accelerate the development of revolutionary struggles by the working class. This war won't be settled in the military battlefields. It's going to be settled with the development of class struggle on the international scale, and the American ruling class knows that very well. They're aware of that. Trotsky said brilliantly in his manifesto of 1940, he said, "We don't follow the war map, we follow the map of the class struggle." Take a look at that map. Look at the scale of the working class in Africa, the growth of the working class throughout the Middle East, in Latin America, the manner in which broad sections, even of the American population, which might have been previously defined as middle class, are being proletarianized. I mean, we are the greatest social force in the world today is the international working class. And to the extent that its growing radicalization finds expression in political perspective, that is, it recognizes its power, recognizes itself as a class, begins to break politically from the dominance of all the old and reactionary capitalist parties. And we have here in the United States, the filthiest of them all, the Democratic Party. Once it breaks with that and begins to define itself in class terms, then, of course, the entire framework within which this war is viewed will be transformed.
Thank you for that, Dave. I think Dave has raised, very directly the necessity for workers and for, in fact, everyone who is listening to this webinar today to take political decisions, to take political action, to recognize your own political power and, as part of the working class. And that means to join our movement, the International Committee of the Fourth International. I think we have a slide that has contact details which can be put up on the screen. And I would really urge all of you listening today to get in touch with the Socialist Equality Party in your country, if there is one, or the Socialist Equality Group in the case of New Zealand and Brazil, and to apply to get in touch with us to have discussions. Or if you're in a country where there is no section, to take the step of contacting us, contacting the ICFI to discuss the necessary political fight that has to be undertaken to build a section of this party. I want to pick up on some of the points that Comrade Dave has made about political perspective. In posing the next question to the whole panel, really. We have noted from the outset of this war, and in this way, it's unlike the attack on Iraq in 2003, where there was mass opposition, but not on the same scale. This is, an extraordinarily historically unpopular war against Iran. And, you know, especially in the United States, polls that have been mentioned already show overwhelming hostility to the Trump administration. And this, of course, has been growing for many years. And in a sense, it was shown in the mass protests against the Gaza genocide. And we, I mean, our movement, the World Socialist Web Site, really in opposition to every other political tendency, made the point from the very outset that the genocide unleashed on the people of Gaza, which is still continuing, and the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip was connected, was one front, in fact, in a broader war, which include and that it included very explicitly the preparation for war against Iran. So I think, I mean, I'd like to ask the panel to address, you know, to speak about this enormous political experience that millions of workers and young people have gone through over the past 2.5 years since October 2023. There have been, you know, an unprecedented wave of demonstrations all across the world, and yet, as I said, the genocide continues and is now expanding into Iran using the same criminal methods that were used in Gaza. So what assessment, what's the political balance sheet that has to be drawn of the demonstrations against the Gaza genocide and the political perspective behind them or that dominated those protests? If anyone on this call would like to start, you're muted, Dave, if you're trying to speak. No, you have to unmute.
I was going to suggest, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep. I was going to suggest that your question should be addressed by your co-moderator, Joe Kishore, who's the National Secretary of the Socialist Equality Party. I think he can probably give the best summation of the developments within the United States, which obviously are very critical to the movement against war.
Well, I was also going to raise that I think Tom Scripps would be very good at answering this question as well. You know, I think that one of the central issues that we raised in relationship to the Gaza genocide was precisely that it had to be understood. And I think this connects to the points that David was just making about the relationship of Israel and the United States, but that it had to be understood as a component part of a global war. And we specifically raised, and you can go back and read the initial statements from the World Socialist Web Site on the Gaza genocide, raised that this was targeting Iran, and that this had to be understood as part of a broader war throughout the Middle East, and that was why all of the imperialist powers backed what was a genocide, the mass slaughter of an entire population. It's what they did, it's what they announced they were doing, and it's what they carried out for now more than 2 years. And it's ongoing. I mean, you know, what Tom referred to at the beginning of, you know, what they're saying now, that the West Bank is going to be a new Gaza. They saw this, the Israelis and the fascists in the Netanyahu government saw this as an opportunity to carry out the final solution of the Palestinian problem. But it was not just Israel. And it was backed by the imperialist powers. And I think the points that David was making about the relationship of Israel to the United States are very, very important. I mean, Biden, of course, had said if Israel didn't exist, we would have to invent it. And he said that in relationship to the massive military force and Israel as basically a gendarme attack dog in the Middle East, advancing American imperialist interests. But it wasn't just the Americans, the European imperialists, all of them supported a genocide, and they continue to. who was it? One of the German leaders who said Israel is doing our dirty work for us. And now you have the war in Iran and the continuation. And they do have a conception, I think also what was raised towards the beginning, they have a strategy to essentially the Gaza model for Iran, for a country of 90 million people. This is an absolutely criminal oligarchy. But I think that is related to the basic political question as to how this is going to be stopped. It's not through, this is the basic issue of the protests against the genocide, and some for another, an appeal to the powers that be, the political establishment, a moral appeal to stop support for this. And that's not the issue. And I think that what has come out of it, I mean, you have massive demonstrations, millions of people all over the world protesting the genocide. But it was channeled various groups in different countries behind a perspective of pressuring the political establishment. When what is actually required, and I think this is where, again, what also Will was raising, what is really necessary is the development of a movement in the working class, mobilizing the social power of the working class, the economic power of the working class, which, by the way, is also raised directly in relationship to this war, arms manufacturing, transport, logistics. The working class has enormous power to intervene into this situation. The economic, social power, and the political power. That this is a fight against imperialism, and all those, because what David was stressing about the relationship of this is a fight against imperialism. It's a fight against American imperialism. It's a fight against European imperialism. And that fight has to be waged through the development of the mobilization of that social force, the working class, which its interests are against war, its interests are against the oligarchy driving war, and its interests are towards revolution. I think that is, in a sense, the basic lesson from the Gaza genocide protests.
Yeah, maybe if I could come in here, as Joe has suggested. I mean, Britain saw some of, if not the largest, most sustained protests against the Gaza genocide anywhere in the world. But if I can approach this question in this way, I was at the first real national demonstration in Britain against the Iran war just yesterday, organized by much the same forces. And that was a protest of some 5,000 to 10,000 people. Very small in relation to two things, to the severity of the situation and to the well of mass opposition that does exist and could be mobilized on the proper perspective. Now that will change, those numbers will change, but they will only change fundamentally through an overcoming of the politics of the leadership who produced that result yesterday, and which is the outcome of how they drove the movement against the Gaza genocide into a dead end. Joe has explained well, that we always analyzed what was being done to Gaza and in the West Bank, and of course, including the strikes in Yemen and Lebanon, as one front of an ever-expanding global war, and as something that needed to be opposed on that basis. And for 2 years, the leadership of the movement in Britain, Stop the War Coalition, and the most prominent associated figure, of course, Jeremy Corbyn, isolated the issue entirely from these questions, because to have brought them in would have cut across their political line of appeals to the Starmer government, the promotion of the idea that some more progressive British imperialist policy is out there somewhere waiting to be found, would have cut across the political cover they gave to the trade union bureaucracy to make a lot of noises of opposition again about the Gaza genocide while doing nothing to mobilize their members. The building of an anti-war movement, little could underscore better that the building of an anti-war movement is a question of perspective and of political leadership. As Joe said, the perspective of a turn to the mobilization of the international working class, but you have to build a political leadership to fight for that. I mean, this goes right back in Britain. Britain has had a very long experience with anti-war protest in recent decades and with the betrayals of anti-war sentiment. But again, during Iraq, massive opposition to British involvement in that war, to the point of Tony Blair considering the deployment of heavy force, even armed force, against protesters. It's when he declared it a principle of government that sometimes you have to act against the will of the people. Millions on the streets. And the leadership that was given by the same forces, still the Stop the War Coalition and so on, still in the leadership of the anti-war movement presently, turned everyone into the dead end of the supposedly more peaceable European powers. You see how that's now turned out with what's already been said of France and Germany, to sections of bourgeois politics who were somewhat more squeamish about what was being done or had somewhat more freedom to make tactical criticisms. A line which saw that movement squandered. And then you had the election of Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party some years later in 2015, more than anything else on the back of as the undeserving beneficiary of anti-imperialist sentiment, anti-war sentiment, and hatred and disgust of the Blairites, the Blairite Labour Party on that basis. Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party by a sort of swell of largely younger, less experienced people to deal with these political criminals. And he spent the next 5 years as head of the Labour Party doing precisely the opposite, tying the hands of those supporters behind their backs, declaring a broad church within which the Blairite wing was very welcome, while an inquisition was being waged by that Blairite right wing against the membership and against any left-wing sentiment. And that had a disorienting, semi-demoralizing effect. I don't want to overplay that word because that is not the overwhelming, that is not the defining sentiment in the working class and among the youth. It's a sort of anger and a search for a new politics. And that is beginning to come forward again. I mean, Dave spoke about how this was shattering the old rotten bourgeois political setup. That's very evident in Britain. Britain has one of the key pillars of British bourgeois rule for a long time has been the rotten two-party system propped up by first past the post, which has always ensured a sort of handover between the Conservatives and the Labour Party. Right now, the most recent poll puts those two pillars of bourgeois rule in Britain in third and fourth place, some 5 to 10 points behind two new parties. Now, those parties are a far-right party, Reform UK, and the Green Party, which again points to the political issues, which can only be solved by a consistent fight for revolutionary leadership and a revolutionary alternative. And the impulse for that sort of politics is developing, well developed. The Ukraine war created a massive energy price shock, sent inflation sky high, I think in Britain worse than any other European country, and kick-started a level of strike activity that hadn't been seen in Britain for generations. And again, that ran heavily into the opposition of the trade union bureaucracy, but it began posing those questions, and workers are still asking those questions, and they've not forgotten what was done to that first attempt to break out of the stranglehold that these forces seem to exercise on political life. Now, this war, we're already seeing, is far more severe in its implications. There's, of course, going to be another energy price shock, the oil flows and the gas flows. That is coupled with what is coming down the pipeline in terms of food prices. The Gulf is at the center of the global production of fertilizers, with the Northern Hemisphere heading into a period in which these are widely applied. You have the immediate experience of the hundreds of thousands of British and far more European citizens already in the crossfires in the Gulf. I was traveling today, and on the train, I overheard, I wasn't on there for long, in the space of about 2 hours, I overheard 4 or 5 conversations on the war in Iran, all opposed, all in different aspects. People who knew someone in the region, people who were worried about, should we be filling up our petrol tanks? Should we be setting up our emergency supply cupboards of foods? Is this going to expand? this is going to have a profoundly radicalizing effect beyond the impact of all the events we know of the last few years. That is going to drive a search for new political answers. And the revolutionary perspective, which Joe just articulated, is going to have a wider and wider audience.
If I could just make, I think it's a very important point. If I just very briefly add on, one of the factors that led to the victory of Mamdani, the DSA mayor of New York City, was opposition to the genocide, as well as opposition to Trump and dictatorship. But that was a very significant factor. And that he went, and then his immediate, even before elected, he went and visited the White House and shook hands with Trump as he was carrying out the genocide, escalating it, and then met with him again on the very eve of the bombing of Iran, where they discussed what was about to happen. It just exposes the absolute political bankruptcy of the DSA, not just Mamdani in particular, but this whole political tendency. And this is universal. I'm sure Christoph could speak about the left party in Germany, and you have, it's the politics of the pseudo left. Are there others who'd like to address this issue?
Yeah, if I could make one point there, because it's what Tom said is very decisive. In Germany, last year alone, there were already 200,000 jobs in the industry destroyed. And this year, they already planned for hundreds of thousands of more job cuts at VW in the auto industry, everywhere, steel industry. And this is already a real confrontation with the working class. And it's closely connected to the war policy, the war in Ukraine against Russia, the war, the genocide in Gaza, all that played a significant role in this crisis, and also the rearmament, of course, which costs billions and trillions of dollars. And so this is a huge crisis. In this situation, you can really see how the pseudo-left defenders of capitalism are closing their ranks, and closing the ranks with the ruling elite. I spoke about the left party that basically is celebrating the outcome of this war, the killings. And but if you look at the Stalinist youth, for example, in Germany, there was a big demonstration on Thursday in Germany against the draft by 50,000 high school students. They demonstrated against the reintroduction of the draft. And the Stalinist Youth Organization, together with a lot of other groups, openly declared we can't discuss Iran here. We can't discuss the war. That would weaken the movement and so on. So we have to leave everything out. So they play a very deliberate role to keep the questions out, to suppress opposition to capitalism, and of course strengthening the union apparatus that is suppressing the workers and organizing the cuts. And so it becomes very clear, I think, when you think about it and when you go through these tendencies, how important it is really to fight for a political perspective that is directed against capitalism, that is unifying workers internationally on this basis, and is really fighting for socialist society, for world socialist revolution.
Thank you, Christoph, and Tom also. I'd like to just shift gears a little bit. I think it's related to the question we're discussing about the basis for developing a mass anti-war movement. As comrades have talked about, there is mass opposition already emerging to this war on the back of mass opposition to the Gaza genocide. In Germany as well, there have been demonstrations by high school students against conscription, which have tremendous political significance. And of course, all of these imperialist powers across Europe have rushed to endorse the barbaric attack on Iran, while simultaneously that they've been transforming their societies and economies for war against Russia, which is the character of the war in Ukraine. And I want to mention that we are approaching 2 years since the imprisonment of Bogdan Syrotyuk, I believe, 26-year-old leader and founder of the Young Guard of Bolshevik Leninists in Ukraine, a Trotskyist organization of young people, which actually has members in Russia, Ukraine, and across that region, and is in solidarity with the International Committee of the Fourth International. He was jailed almost 2 years ago by the Zelensky regime on trumped-up charges of aiding Russia because the Young Guard of Bolshevik Leninists has been fighting to unify the working class in Russia and in Ukraine against the war and against the oligarchies that govern both these countries. I also should note, I mean, Volodymyr Zelensky is proactively offering his government's assistance to the United States for the war against Iran. Particularly, Ukraine has expertise in countering drone strikes from Iran. So I think we have limited time, but I would urge everyone, firstly, everyone watching, to go to wsws.org/freebogdan and sign the petition and share the petition widely to demand the release of Bogdan Syrotyuk, who is being held in atrocious conditions with access to medical and dental care denied to him, and join the fight that we are waging for his freedom. And I think there's so I just wanted to make that point, really, to raise that point. As I say, it is directly connected with the strategy that's needed to fight against what is a developing world war, of which both Ukraine, Iran, Lebanon, and Gaza are different fronts. With that said, we have one further question I'd like to put to the panel, or in particular to Will Lehman. This is from a member of the audience. Can Will tell us about the mood in Pennsylvania, and specifically in Quakertown, after the police brutality shown towards high school students protesting immigration and customs enforcement, ICE thugs? Is there a sense of radicalism against the war in Iran and against the fascist Trump administration more broadly? I wonder if you could briefly speak about that, Will.
Yes, there is definitely a mood against both. There already was. There were protests against ICE even before this most recent attack on children, essentially, walking out of their school in demonstration, just exercising their First Amendment right, and were attacked by off-duty police. Told by some that there was more than one officer than the chief, Scott McElry, who attacked the children. I know that there were multiple on-duty police as well that attacked, but it's definitely a very contentious situation. The majority of Pennsylvanians, and I noted the historical sentiment in the video I posted supporting the Quakertown students, that this was an area that defied slave catchers during when the Fugitive Slave Act was still law, and that legality has not stopped residents of the area in the past when revolutionary actions are necessary, and it didn't this time either. So just to state that there is broad opposition. There's, I think, definite sentiment for revolution brewing again in in Pennsylvania. I mean, it was a heavily industrialized region, has been deindustrialized. And to the extent that they had any kind of support for Trump, it was on the basis of his promises essentially to reindustrialize the region and confusion over what that would mean. That's not happened, of course. The wars are massively unpopular in Pennsylvania. And I think that that's more of an expression of that students are taking to the streets here. And it's not been only in Quakertown. Quakertown is notable because of what the police did there, but at other schools in Pennsylvania where students have walked out as well. I mean, this does show, too, with the hearings they've had after to try to mitigate the damage done to the optics of what the police did. Many local working class people came forward to defend their children, so I think that it's a powerful example of the sentiment that exists. But again, as other comrades have made on this call, the point that it needs to be more than just that political sentiment. It needs to be a political perspective, not just based on the morality of what ICE is doing, but more largely what we can do to actually overcome ICE's attacks. And that, again, as other comrades have mentioned, more focuses on the necessity of workers forming rank and file committees in their plants not only all over the country, but internationally, to fight back against not only ICE, but Trump's fascistic regime.
Thank you, Will. And we're reaching the end of our time here. I want to, as we sort of move towards a conclusion and somewhat drawing on the points you just made, direct a question to David. David, you wrote in the statement on this webinar, which was published on Saturday, that Trump now declares that the war will end with unconditional surrender of Iran. The task of the working class is to turn this war into an unmitigated and unconditional defeat and disaster for U.S. and world imperialism. My question, and I think it's a question that I think many on this call are thinking about, is this possible? And how is it to be done? It's related to the more fun, or the related question is what those listening should do. But what do you see in terms of the development of a mass social movement in the United States?
Well, let me perhaps answer that in a number of ways. First of all, I think it's, if I can speak to the younger generation, and I suppose from where I stand, almost everybody's part of the younger generation, but particularly the younger people. I recall, of course, the period of the Vietnam War back in the 60s when I was politically radicalized, and the anger which so many of my generation felt over the atrocities being committed by the US government. The daily bombing of Hanoi, Haiphong, the announcement of body counts. Hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? And the outrage over Vietnam was, of course, underlying that was not just Vietnam, but our familiarity with the fact that imperialism had been responsible for two horrifying wars in the 20th century. World War I was the war my grandparents fought. World War II was the war my parents went through. So we were aware of that, and we were, of course, exposed to the many anti-war films of that time. And we felt profound outrage over this. But outrage without perspective can be misdirected, and that was the fate of many of my generation, or misled. The great question was one of perspective, which becomes so critical. And I just want to stress, before I make a few other points, again, speaking to young people, don't, of all the false propaganda, perhaps the most misleading is the conception that this government is all powerful. They're not. Lenin once said very profoundly in response to a claim, I think it was by Kautsky, that governments are never so powerful as when wars begin. He said just the opposite is true. They're never so weak. And that is profoundly true. But of course, weakness also motivates violent actions, repression. And I am not in any way minimizing the dangers that exist. They are real and they are extreme. Trump, this government, is risking everything on this war. And they too see themselves fighting an existential conflict. But I want to emphasize, and it really occurred to me, particularly when I heard Will speak, and he evoked the traditions of Pennsylvania, which played such an enormous role in the American Revolution. The formation of committees of correspondence, the growing outrage over the actions of the equivalent device of the 18th century, the British troops who were marching here and there around American towns and villages, committing acts of repression against the citizens in Pennsylvania, of course, in Boston. And it seemed to those who lived through that, what could be done to stop this? The British Army, the British military, the British Empire was the most powerful force in the world, against which the forces of the American colonists seemed paltry. And somehow those traditions are being reawakened. And it's important to understand that with all the political problems we face in the United States, all the problems of, you might say, political backwardness, the backwardness of the culture, the endless and relentless propagation of anti-socialism, anti-communism. Nevertheless, this is a country with profound democratic and revolutionary traditions. And in fact, these traditions, in a way which is quite unique, define what Americans see themselves as. This is a country which is extraordinarily diverse, ethnically, religiously, but what underlies, or the common element or foundational element of consciousness, is that this is a democratic country. The great documents of American history are, of course, the Declaration of Independence, which declared, in a way which had never been said before, that all men are created equal, and declared that this is self-evident at a time when everything in the world said it wasn't self-evident. But in writing that document, and I think it's important to refer to the opening passage. In writing the document, Jefferson explained that he was writing this, or the colonists were writing this document because, as he said, a decent respect for the opinions of mankind required them to explain why they had entered into revolutionary struggle. A decent respect for the opinions of mankind. Does this government show a decent respect for anyone's opinions other than that of that idiot, scoundrel, felon, Donald Trump, and his coterie of political nutcases? They have no respect for anyone. They have no respect for the American people. They have no respect for the opinion of the world. Well, there is another great document, which is Lincoln's second inaugural. Of course, it says in the famous concluding passages, with malice toward none, with charity for all. And then it concludes that the aim of the U.S. Republic, and he said in the last words, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. That was Lincoln. And the extraordinary place that Lincoln occupies in the collective consciousness of the American people was that he defined the fundamental ideals which motivated the revolutions of the United States. Lincoln wasn't a socialism. He lived in a different historical period. And I'm not saying this so we all should get out and sing the Stars and Stripes. But these traditions mean something. And what Trump is doing and what this government is doing is profoundly offensive. It is undermining in a profound and irretrievable way how Americans understand their government, how they see it. It's not just that they disagree with policy. They see this as an alien force, something which is against them, everything they believe. And revolutions take place not only because of the immediate impact of bad conditions. Now, as Trotsky also said quite well, he said, not everyone responds the same way to an argument, but everyone responds the same way to a red-hot poker. Well, the red-hot poker is the growing economic crisis, the deterioration of conditions, growth of unemployment. But it also takes place under conditions in which there is a profound shift underway in social consciousness, the way people see this country, the way people see this regime. And it is under these conditions that a process of mass radicalization acquires a new theoretical, ideological form. And here we are about to observe the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. And all at once, its implications for us and for the world become enormously important. We might add that, and this was raised by the colonists, one of the reasons why Congress had to have the right to declare war was because they had the experience of monarchy, kings launching wars and taking countries into wars against the consent of the people, bankrupting the country. You know? So these traditions become very, very real. But these great democratic traditions, which the socialist movement values and defends, these traditions and these rights and these fundamental elements of democratic society cannot be maintained within the framework of capitalism. Socialism is necessary if we are to have any democratic rights, if we are to preserve the rights of the people. That is only possible through the transfer of power to the working class and the reconstruction of society on a socialist basis. You can't separate this war from the staggering levels of inequality, from the concentration of wealth into a handful of corrupt and gangster-like billionaires. Let's face it, just as this war was unfolding, what was everyone talking about? Trump's good buddy, Jeffrey Epstein. The good buddy of Prince Andrew, if I can be blunt, whose service it seemed the ruling classes in every Western European country and the United States. So I think we're at a point where events are.
Sorry, looks like we just lost the connection from David. Presume that's not just me, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's unfortunate. He was bringing his comments to a conclusion. Do we have David back on? Tom, perhaps you want to take up the final points that David was making and make some concluding remarks.
Well, I'll do my best. I mean, I think it was a powerful statement from Dave, and on the traditions that still exist in the working class and are very deeply rooted in the United States, in the democratic revolutions there. And I think it goes to the heart of the character of this webinar, which will be the first of many that we are holding on this, as part of our fight to mobilize the working class against this war. I mean, there's no shortage of commentary that you can find on YouTube and elsewhere in the bourgeois media on the horrific developments that are now unfolding. there's even in some of it a degree of shock and concern, and speculation about how the war will unfold, what the implications will be for the United States and the Trump administration. All of which I think, in one way or another, is intended or is meant to encourage basically a passivity among workers and young people. I mean, in different ways, the basic message that is given through the media is there's really nothing you can do, and that's reinforced also by groups such as the Democratic Socialists of America, who declare that really all you can do is write to your congressperson, petition the government, appeal to the powers that be. What we've shown, I think, on the World Socialist Web Site and in our discussion today is this is completely false. The working class, as many speakers here have emphasized, is not powerless, and it will move in response, in opposition to the war, the economic crisis, above all, the attacks on its living standards, as well as against the development of fascism and authoritarianism in the United States and Europe and elsewhere. But this movement, which will develop and is developing on a global scale, requires political leadership, which must be international, must be grounded in the lessons of revolutionary struggles throughout history, that speakers here today have referenced. And I think that's really the significance of this very unique webinar. So I'd just like to conclude really by thanking all of the participants who have spoken today for advancing this political perspective, and I urge everyone listening once again to follow our coverage every day on the World Socialist Web Site, and to contact us and to join this movement, the International Committee of the Fourth International, including our youth organization, the International Youth and Students for Social Equality. With that, I think we can bring this. Joe, you'd like to make a point?
If I could just add, just very quickly to bring to or drawing on what David was saying in relationship to the Declaration of Independence, which also includes that famous statement, when the government becomes a hindrance to the rights of the people, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Trotsky, speaking about a different revolutionary period, referenced in relationship to the Russian Revolution that a revolutionary period is characterized by the forcible intervention of the masses into world history. Such is a period we're in. But we have to build this movement. All of those who are on right now, if you're listening to this, sign up, join the Socialist Equality Party if there is one in your country. Fill out the form if there isn't. Become involved in building a section of the International Committee. I'm also want to appeal to everyone on the call today to make a donation. As Tom was saying, this is an entirely unique event. You don't find a perspective like this outside of the World Socialist website. Make a donation. Help us have these events in the future and have this type of discussion. So if you're listening right now, go to wsws.org/donate, or there should be an option on the form that you're watching, if you're watching through the WSWS, and make a donation. There's a lot of issues that we were not able to cover today, including there's questions that are being asked by readers. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to them. Questions about the Kurdish issue. I would urge everyone here to go to World Socialist website now. You can read a very important statement from the Socialist Equality Party in Turkey on the front page on this issue, other issues on Cuba and other questions which we were not able to address. Hopefully we'll be able to do so in future meetings. But again, everyone on the call, listening on the website or on social media, make the decision to get involved, join the Socialist Equality Party, join the IYSCC, and take up this conscious fight. The situation will not be changed without a struggle and without the building of a leadership. Thank everyone who participated and listened in today. We'll conclude now.